Now, meanwhile, the United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed his G7 counterparts while in Tokyo, with the 7 leading industrial democracies announcing a unified stance with Israel in their fight against Hamas.
The G7 ministers reaffirmed our staunch support for Israel's right and obligation to defend itself and seek to ensure the attacks of October 7th can never happen again in accordance with international humanitarian law. We had in-depth discussions about the steps that we are taking to address urgent needs on the ground. We all agreed that humanitarian pauses would advance key objectives: to protect Palestinian civilians, to increase the sustained flow of humanitarian assistance, to allow our citizens and foreign nationals to exit, and to facilitate the release of hostages. I briefed my colleagues about my conversations with Israeli leaders on pauses and on concrete steps to minimize harm to Palestinian civilians in Gaza and to stop extremist violence in the West Bank. Israel has repeatedly told us that there is no going back to October 6th before the barbaric attacks by Hamas. We fully agree. As we work with Israel to ensure this, we also are working in the region to deter broader threats to our partners and to our friends. As the President has said, to anyone seeking to take advantage of the crisis in Gaza and spread conflict to other theaters, don't. All of us want to end this conflict as soon as possible, and meanwhile, to minimize civilian suffering. But as I discussed with my G7 colleagues, those calling for an immediate ceasefire have an obligation to explain how to address the unacceptable result it would likely bring about. Hamas left in place with more than 200 hostages, with the capacity and stated intent to repeat October 7th again and again and again.
That was U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressing his counterparts from the G7 countries. I'm curious, Danny, we're seeing him speak to them, and the G7 countries now stating that they are standing behind Israel with its right to defend itself. By having some of these major leaders step up and continue to support Israel, how does that help in Israel's ongoing war efforts against Hamas?
Oh, it's very encouraging. It's really giving us the time and the place where we can really polarize Hamas. It takes time. And you see, Nicole, the operation of the IDF, unlike many other militaries in the world, is very precise, as much as it can be precise in just an urban area, with minimal number of casualties. I can just compare this to the Russians in Grozny. You know, they are just carpet bombing. They are just savages. And of course, they have the temerity to criticize us. Many other, Western militaries are not working as precise, as professional as we are. I think it's very encouraging, and it's also symbolizing the fact that the Americans are here with us, actually sharing the same interest, the interest of stability, and also giving some horizon of peace and future for the region. We see a change in the rhetorics, which we have not seen in the past. When the Americans are talking, like Blinken now in Tokyo, that Israel has the right to self-defense, he does not end with the right. He says it's not just the right, it's the obligation, which means it's a very, very strong support. And it goes together with the talks about maybe some humanitarian ceasefire, which is only a ploy by Hamas. If they talk about humanitarian ceasefire, we want to see a real humanitarian ceasefire, meaning at least let the children and elderly come out. I mean, this is the first and foremost humanitarian issue in Gaza right now, is the hostages that were brutally taken away from their families and homes. Some of them are 9-month-old babies. They have pregnant women there. And they talk about humanitarian ceasefire. Okay, humanitarian ceasefire. Get those people out, and then we can talk about the next stage.
I know these stages take time, and it seems that the United States understands that as well, but how long is this ticking clock going to hold up, especially with these calls for a humanitarian pause that so far Israel has not succumbed to? How long is this balancing act going to ask between Israel continuing ahead with its military advances, but also having to appeal to its allies?
Well, there's not a fixed amount of time. It depends on development on the ground. God forbid if there will be some mass casualties coming out because of some mishap and the Israeli artillery shelling on some uninvolved, that could really bring down the clock to a stop, where the Americans would really have to put down. We have had this experience before in Lebanon, the Second Lebanon War. We're not there yet. And again, for that, we need the time. And I think the Americans now understand that, I have never seen, Nicole, such an intimate involvement of Americans or on all levels, from the president down. When Blinken comes here, he is a participant of the war cabinet. And they also have some generals, American military, who come here just to observe and to see. Some of them came with the idea of giving some advice after they had their experience of urban warfare in Mosul and Fallujah in Iraq. And they come away with the fact that actually they can learn a lot from the IDF, which is, on the one hand, it's really heartwarming, but it takes time. And time is the essence. And I believe so far, if we conduct ourselves in a continued professional military manner, we do have the time.
You mentioned it comes from the top down, from the president. Now we're seeing also the House of Representatives,
Yes.
them voting to censor Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib over her really promoting this false narrative, this dangerous narrative
Yes.
from a House of Representatives speaker. How does this show that maybe America really is finally taking a really strong stance against this anti-Israel rhetoric that we see in Congress?
Yes. Well, first of all, we have to understand the Americans, those who are in the corridors of powers, those who are exposed to all the intelligence and information and understand the strategic thinking of America and the interest of America, they're all with us. You see it in the administration, you see it in Congress. The public opinion it's a mixed bag. And unfortunately, what we see here, the rise of anti-Semitism, is coming from a very specific corner. And this is the Islamist corner, with the hundreds and thousands and maybe millions of Muslim refugees who came to the United States, either as refugees from Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria. And they are the ones who have been incited by the Palestinians. They have a propaganda war against us for decades, Nicole. And we see the results now. What I do expect to see is that there will be some countermeasures, especially by the strong Jewish community. And just like they've had 1 million people march back in the 70s, 80s against the Russians, let my people go, to get the Jews out of the Soviet Union. I think we have to see that now. So that will really put the perspective for the politicians to understand that the support for Israel in America is much stronger than the support for the Palestinians, let alone Hamas. But this has to show.
Is Israel doing anything to combat this anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the United States?
Not enough. Not enough. Where we've always been outnumbered, we've always been out-financed, and this is still the case now. Israel, unfortunately, I can tell you from many years in the Israeli government, is incapable of doing it for many reasons. We need to have our civil society doing it here in Israel, and also our communities. Most Americans support Israel. Of course, the Jewish community, evangelical community, the business community in the United States, and we need to show, and it's very easy. Today, everyone can really be an influencer with an iPhone and a laptop. This is what we need to create a whole network of people who support us and that will be activists for us.
We're going to